I really should say welcome back to the Philippines, actually, because you spent quite a bit of time here a while back, right?
I did, that's absolutely right. I lived here for about 2.5 years in the mid 1980s, a tumultuous period, a very important part of Philippines history,
You know.
a great experience, and I've always been very grateful to the Philippines and so many people here for making that time such fun and teaching me a lot.
Oh, fantastic. What, in your opinion, has, from your personal perspective, has changed the most from that tumultuous time, as you said, to to now?
Well, at that time, I was general manager of Cathay Pacific in the Philippines, so my main focus was on aviation, tourism, and I knew quite a lot about the economic sectors that most affected that. Now, with a much broader role, I suppose I've got a wider perspective of what's happening in the Philippines. But two or three things strike me immediately coming back. One is clearly that the infrastructure investment hasn't really, I think, quite kept up with other social and economic developments, and that's something that President Duterte's government, I think, is going to emphasize and put high up their list of priorities. The second thing is that the attractive thing about the Philippines is that the DNA of the country seems to be absolutely intact in terms of this great spirit of can-do and also a spirit of joy. Let's go about life with enthusiasm. And it makes the Philippines not just a good place to do business with, but also a fun place to do business with. And I think that's important too. I hope that that's something that never leaves your country.
We're seeing a resurgence of trade between the Philippines and the UK. If I'm not mistaken, 28% from 2014. What do you think are some of the underlying reasons for this?
Well, there are lots of good ingredients in the trade figures, and you're quite right that the overall figure is 28%, but the figure in terms of measurable goods and services is 38%, which is a remarkable achievement, especially as overall Philippines trade with the EU actually, I think, went slightly down last year. So you're right, it has picked up quite strongly. Sometimes it's influenced by one or two specific events. So, for example, Philippine Airlines buying Airbus with Rolls-Royce engines and so on will have a significant impact on the trade figures as long as those elements that are UK are sort of squeezed out of the total. But I think what's more exciting in a sense is that the UK is more aware of the great growth of the ASEAN region as a whole and is looking in more detail at individual countries within it and what can be done. So, for example, there's a greater interest now with a stronger middle class in the Philippines of British consumer goods, British cars, British services, prudential's insurance policies and so on. And also even at the sort of level of snacks, we've seen some Filipino companies buy UK businesses, which of course has increased your stock of overseas investments.
Moving forward, how do you see the trade or the trade balance playing out? Are we going to see more investment in the Philippines in terms of imports, exports, or are we going to see more Philippine firms moving outwards and tapping into UK consumers?
Yeah, I think you're right that there will be both growth on the trade and the investment side. And the investment side won't just be one way. It won't just be, let's say, Shell or GlaxoSmithKline investing more in the Philippines. I think we'll also see some of the leading Filipino groups and businesses expanding and buying UK businesses, which is good. We encourage that. It's a very open market. And the trade, I think, which is broadly balanced at the moment, I hope that will continue. I think there's probably more demand in the UK for things like textiles and design from the Philippines than is currently recognized. And at the same time, I think there are some good opportunities for niche British SMEs to manufacture here, either alone or in partnership. And the President, I think, has in mind to review and ultimately, I hope, to liberalize the current restrictions on foreign ownership of some businesses here, which will definitely attract more foreign investment, and not just from the UK, but more widely as well.
Different places. Are there any sectors that UK firms and I guess the wider global investment public are looking at particularly that would be liberalized?
Well, at the moment, I think I'm right in saying you can only own 100% of a company if it's exporting from the Philippines. So if you're manufacturing or investing here for the domestic market, there are considerable limitations. And taking those restrictions away would make the Philippines very competitive with other economies like Singapore, where there's virtually no restrictions on that type. So I wouldn't want to prejudge too much what will happen once those restrictions have been lifted. But to give one example, I mean, I'd love to see a British university or a British school operating in the Philippines. I think it would bring an international component to the educational offer. We do it in Malaysia. It's been very successful there. So no reason why it couldn't work well in the Philippines. And, you know, it's very expensive going overseas or to the UK to school and university. But if we had the school and university here, it would be much more realizable for more people. And I think the President is very keen on an economy that works for everyone, not just for the well-off.
And this would follow kind of Singapore's model, where they're taking some of the universities from some of the big names from abroad and bringing them over.
Yeah, although Malaysia's done much more because, of course, it's much bigger and got more space. And I think that's the opportunity for the Philippines as well. Singapore is effectively handicapped by only being able to do so much within the relatively small space that they've got. They've done a great deal with it.
How about other sectors of potential investment, say infrastructure or and energy? A lot of countries are interested. A lot of big multinationals are interested. Do you think that there's some sort of there's interest from UK firms?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there are some UK firms who are here already and contributing to the Philippines' energy needs. The most well-known is probably Shell. And I think they've got some quite exciting future plans as well. On the energy side, of course, where there are potential short-term energy disruptions or shortages, then it's possible that British companies like Aggreko, who specialize in emergency power provision, could be very useful. And I think that's something that Clark Air Base, for example, the former Clark Air Base, might want to consider in order to make sure that there are no disruptions to the manufacturing lines there.
I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned niche SMEs. Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Well, I think the thing with SMEs is that some will be really capacity restricted on what they can achieve overseas just because they don't have that many people. And so for some of them, if they're making consumer goods, for example, then there are opportunities to find someone who can be a franchisee or represent them in the Philippines can be attractive. And at the top end, we've seen several UK consumer brands come in here through the JSG Gokonway group. Robina has done a lot of work on this. But there's no reason why we couldn't get some SME manufacturers to emulate the success of STI in Cebu, where they're manufacturing some products for local consumption and others that are exported back to the UK as components for end products. But it's a case of finding people who are really interested in committing to the market. And for that, we need to look quite hard. But they will definitely be encouraged by the sort of messages the government is giving out.
Fantastic. Of course, we can't talk about trade and potential investment without addressing the elephant in the room, which is, of course, Brexit. I'm just curious, how do you see Brexit affecting a potential UK-Philippine trade in the medium and short term?
Yeah, well, I think broadly, I see the opportunities more than I see the dangers because psychologically, this was already 2 months ago. We've formed a new government. We got a new prime minister since then. So, in the UK, it's easy for us to have moved on in a sense. We've seen the instant stabilisation. So, business is always worried by uncertainty. They don't like things they didn't expect. And so Brexit could have had a damaging impact on investment and deals that were waiting to be implemented. But the reality since Brexit has been actually a slight surge in inward investment because, of course, sterling took an immediate currency hit. So effectively, people who were buying businesses or goods are now able to buy them at roughly 10 or 11% cheaper prices than they were a couple of months ago. So it's like a sort of an early Christmas sale, if you like. And the currency buy British, buy now. The currency may strengthen again, and that sort of opportunity may disappear a bit. But the longer term, obviously, we've got around 2 years to try and find an agreement with the EU on future relations. That's after we've triggered what they call Article 50, which is the formal notice to
exit the EU.
Yeah, and I would expect that at some point in the early new year. So during that period, what we can do with the Philippines is have informal discussions about what sort of trade agreements we'd like to have after we've left the EU.
This would be because we would need a new trade agreement now that it's not encompassed with the EU trade agreement.
Exactly. So at the moment, you've already started negotiations with the EU for a free trade agreement. For as long as we're still part of the EU, we are formally a partner, if you like, in that dialogue. And depending how long it takes you to reach agreement, it may already be in place before we leave the EU, in which case it can act as the starting point for a separate Philippines-UK discussion and agreement. But my guess is that we will want to tailor it slightly to the needs of both Philippines and the UK, and we can start some informal discussions on that as time goes by.
I was going to ask, actually, you met the president a few days ago. The trade secretary is here. Has there been some headway already?
Well, we had some very good, informal discussions. First, as you mentioned, with the president, at which Secretary Ramon Lopez was present. I saw him again yesterday in his office, and obviously we were together at lunch today. But these were relatively broad meetings, and I think the important thing is this enthusiasm on both sides to not just continue the relationship, but actually to strengthen it and make it bigger and more valuable to both countries. So that's a very encouraging starting point. Mon Lopez has just started as Secretary for the Department of Trade and Industry. I'm just starting as Trade Envoy. I hope this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you would like to see included in these talks from a UK perspective?
Well, I think it'll be more about what exactly it is we want to exclude, because as far as I'm concerned, the starting point is that we try and include everything, and then we find out each country's sensitivities and see what we need to exclude.
Okay. So the Philippines has been in the news lately. It's been quite grim, extrajudicial killings and some brusque pronouncements, shall we say. Do you think that will hinder potential trade and potential investment moving forward?
Well, I think I've been studying quite carefully the 10 points in the president's socio-economic plan, what I call the 10 commandments. And the ones I'm really most interested in and where I think business will be most focused is things like the commitment to an huge extra investment in infrastructure, 5% of GDP, with the public-private partnerships, PPP, playing a really important role. And that opens the door for UK infrastructure experts, whether master planners, architects, companies like Arup and Mott MacDonald, who've done lots of these projects around the world, to work very closely with their Filipino counterparts. And I think it'll be that sort of thing, and the liberalization of the foreign investment restrictions that businesses will be most focused on. Human rights are important, make no mistake about it, and they're important for the Philippines as well as the UK. But it's very important that the environment for business continues as it has done. The rule of law, as the President stressed, is very important, and opening up the doors for more foreign investment is a clear goal of this government, and I support that.
Okay, fantastic. You spent a lot of time around the region. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the comparative advantages that could make the Philippines, I guess, stick out compared to our neighbors?
Well, the Philippines got a lot of things going for you because you've got a domestic population of just over 100 million, which makes you one of the larger countries in ASEAN. It's a fantastic place to travel as a tourist in. I spent as much time as I could when I was living here, traveling on weekends and holidays. And I spent a lot of time in Mindanao at the end of my time here. So I think the tourism potential is enormous, and direct flights between Philippine Airlines and London is a very good starting point. I think Cebu Pacific has got ambitions to do much more regionally. So I think that's an area where if the Philippines focused on the infrastructure that was good for tourism, as well as doing things that are really good for Filipinos and Filipinas getting to work and so on, which will be the president's priority, then I think you should see a growth in the tourism sector as well. And the other thing, of course, you've got, which is still true, is that the quality of English spoken in the Philippines is absolutely as high as anything else in ASEAN and much better than most countries. So that's a strong competitive advantage.
How do you see the AEC, or the ASEAN Economic Community, playing into the UK strategy for trade with the region and with the Philippines? Do you see it as like UK firms coming in and using it as a base to come into or to export to other ASEAN countries, or?
Yeah, I think the
consumer
ASEAN Economic Community, which is now 10 years old, is very much work in progress. I should be seeing them again in a few days' time. I think we've got one or two specific ideas to sort of contribute as to how they can take forward standardization of quality and training around the region, so that a Filipino who's got a particular qualification in, say, engineering or architecture, I think it'd be helpful for everyone if that's recognized and they can use that and practice around the region, and vice versa from Singapore and the Philippines and so on. So there are some standards there which the UK has, which I think could easily be made very similar and available in the ASEAN Economic Community. But in general terms, I think the ASEAN Economic Community is not trying to pursue what the European Union did, which was a sort of harmony of politics and economics with a common parliament and so on. So I think for the time being, our focus will tend to be on the bilateral relationships, but I hope to be able to use an informal dialogue with the ASEAN Economic Community to develop various strands which will be good for the UK and ASEAN.
Yeah. Okay, great. So and finally, what are some of the, I guess from your perspective, knowing the Philippines very well and knowing the UK, of course, as your home, what are some of the opportunities for some, like, as you know, a lot of the Philippine firms are going on a buying spree, shall we say. What are some of the opportunities that are present in the UK?
Well, I haven't got a sort of particular shopping list on my hand, but the thing about the UK is that we're a very open economy. We welcome foreign investment from anywhere in almost anything, including what might be considered very sensitive sectors in large parts of the world, like North Sea oil, airports, and nuclear power. These are sensitive sectors even in the West, let alone Asia. But we welcome foreign investment in them because we see the importance of countries who've got huge positive flows of capital contributing into the UK at a time when we've still got quite a large amount of debt accumulated during the financial excesses of sort of 10 years ago. And therefore the foreign contribution that can develop our infrastructure, employ more people, is very helpful. And our openness means that we've been able to, I think, provide more jobs over the last 6 years than the whole of the rest of Europe put together. An additional 2.7 or 8 million jobs over just the last 5 years. So this is a strong achievement. And it sends a message, I think, also, which is a helpful one to President Duterte and his government, which is if you liberalize, actually you open up, you attract investment, that generates more jobs, it's good for the economy, good for people's standards of living. There are a lot of win-wins in it.